but you can test it out to see if the video video.
There's 7 participants.
Yeah, that's just the.
Dr. Wright, if you can hear me, could you unmute and say something for us?
Yes, Carrie Wright.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
So I think we're in good shape.
Are we good? Good to go? All right, welcome everybody to the April meeting of the CTE Committee. Happy Apprenticeship Week. everybody. That's a busy week for a lot of folks here. I want to start by thanking Anthony and Angie and the whole team at Workforce Montgomery. We've had a great time here with them before the meeting. Really appreciate it all hosting us. Okay. Let's talk about what we're hoping to accomplish here in today's meeting. First, we really want to, you'll recall, we passed a joint CTE vision in our last meeting, and we've been working collaboratively on a joint implementation plan for that vision. And so that's a lot of what we're going to focus on today is really walking through the executive summary and kind of 3 key priority areas for that implementation plan, so that we can provide any additional feedback so that the teams from Labor, MSDE, and CTE Committee can then work to finalize that leading up to our June meeting. Second, we want to share outcomes from the legislative session and impacts on our work. So we'll talk about that. And then we're going to highlight some of the Perkins Reserve Grant awardees and the progress that they've made as a result of that funding. So yeah, that sounds good to everybody. Let's start with the not so fun stuff. Just we need to first approve our consent agenda and then also the meeting minutes from our January meeting. Those have been provided to committee members in advance, right? I need to take roll first, don't I?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'll have to just say stop because it's fast, man. Okay. We're gonna do something a little different today for roll call. We're gonna ask all of our committee members who are either here in the room or joining us virtually to announce themselves and their organization or the constituency that they represent, so that folks get to hear people. So I'll start. Myron Norton, Chair of the CTE Committee. Dr. Wright, would you mind introducing yourself first?
Yeah, Carrie Wright, State Superintendent.
Thank you. We have it, I can't see who's on virtually, so.
Either Dr. Boyd or Michael Thomas.
Yes.
Michael?
Yes.
Good afternoon, Michael Thomas, Baltimore City Community College.
Thank you, Dr. Boyd.
Yeah. Donald Boyd, Director of Teaching and Learning, Dorchester County Public Schools.
Thank you. Let's see, we want to start.
Right. Good afternoon, Charlotte Young, CDF Cover. Hi, everybody, Portia Wu, Department of Labor. Hi, everyone. Buenas tardes. Selena Quiroz Savanes, Interim Secretary at the Maryland Higher Education Portion.
Good afternoon, Brian Cavey, with the Insulators Union and Chair of the Apprenticeship Council.
Thank you. I think those were all of our committee members.
Yes, and we have fun.
Okay, we have a quorum. Great. Now we can do the fun stuff. All the committee members received both the public meeting agenda and the meeting minutes in advance of this meeting. So did anyone have any corrections, concerns with either of those? If
No changes or corrections, I'll make a motion to approve both the agenda and the minutes.
you can have a second. Second. You, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Wonderful. They both pass. Thank you. Okay, so as I shared at the beginning, we really want to focus today on the next step here. We approved together again with the AIB and the State Board of Education and all of the agency partners involved. We approved a joint vision statement for CTE. in Maryland. And now the next step in the process is to approve a joint implementation plan where we're really focused on, okay, we know what the vision is. How are we now going to realize that vision? What are the activities that we're going to prioritize? Who's responsible for what? How can we all hold each other accountable for the different pieces that we play in that puzzle? And so we want to walk through today the executive summary, which has been collaboratively drafted. I'm going to let Rachel walk us through this in just a minute, but this will be, think of this as the cover sheet to the implementation plan, and we want as a group to make sure that we're aligned on the 3 key priorities, because that's what all of the activities several will be keyed off of. And any additional feedback that we want to provide as these groups are working to finalize that full implementation plan for our consideration. Personally, I wanted us to keep it like really short. I would love a 1 or 2 page implementation plan. Probably not going to get there, but hoping we can keep it manageable, because in my experience, the more succinct, if you're careful and you make these things succinct and clear, then it's easier to get everyone aligned. Don't get lost in the minutia. So I think that's, in that spirit, that's the conversation we want to have. We want to have kind of that level of discussion. How do we make sure that we're focused on the right things together across the state? So, yeah.
I'm happy to kind of take it from here. And Myra actually did a really great job introducing a lot of this content. So I think one thing I'll do is just kind of ground us in what the actual vision is, just to remind everyone of what that goal is that we're working toward. This was a kind of redo of the apprenticeship goal within the 45% goal. And what it amounts to is that of that 45% by the 2030-31 school year, about 1/5 of those students need to be completing that goal through completing the high school level of a registered apprenticeship as this committee defined it in policy around the end of 2024. And so the other portion completing it through other industry recognized credentials. That amounts to a little over 4,000 students in the graduating class of the 2030-31 school year. We're thinking we got to have a pipeline, got to have slots for a lot of students starting typically maybe even their junior year. That's around 8,000 slots a year. And that is a significant growth from around 100 estimated right now. And so a big part, really to underscore something Myra said, the goal of this plan is to be really clear and tightly focused on the priority actions that we need to take to start reaching and striving and supporting our local partners and striving for those annual targets. And this plan will be something that ultimately, yes, we are held accountable to through the Accountability Implementation Board with their sign off on the plan. And when I say we, it's really all of the partners involved. And so as we have this conversation, it's really important to also remember that this will be something that we revisit as a committee, quarter by quarter, meeting by meeting. How are we doing on the plan? Okay, we said we get this done by this quarter. What's the update? And really looking to our agency partners to be coming and bringing us that information for us to understand how we can support from a policy level, from a membership level, and it included in that what our committee members can commit to supporting, in addition to our agency partners that are sitting on the committee. As we go through this, it's also useful, to just acknowledge, we can't do this in isolation. This isn't a state activity on its own. So while, as Myra outlined, we've been working with, staff from across my team, from the Department of Labor, from the Department of Education, talking with our colleagues at the Higher Education Commission, and even at Commerce and the Governor's Office, and the Accountability Implementation Board, lots of stakeholders, and a lot of folks at the state level involved in this work. It's going to be really important that we think about how we get feedback from our local education agency leadership and partners in the coming weeks as well, when that happens, how it happens, and how that interacts with the goals that we are required to set at the state level, that we are mandated by law to establish and work toward. So next slide, I kind of walk through some of these goals. This is also just, again, I'm not going to walk through all this, but to really ground us in what we're talking about in the definitions as well. So you'll see some of the numeric targets I broke out listed here. And as a reminder, this is all, a goal where some of these key terms were defined by this committee. So industry recognized credentials, the criteria and definitions for those, the approvals that we then work through every year, all being defined by this committee, and the high school level registered apprenticeship also being defined by this committee. So this is, you can see kind of how all these building blocks have been building toward us really needing now to just accelerate setting these annual targets, kind of getting something down on paper that we're working toward that we can then work on and revisit over time. And I don't think I'm going to go through this. We wanted the team really as a takeaway resource for those who have it printed in front of them, or for those watching online where the materials will, or the videos ultimately going to be posted. this is something you can hit pause on if you're watching the recording later to really dig in on exactly where in statute these various definitions and authorities come from. So takeaway resource for folks, won't spend too much time here. But those are kind of the footnotes. And I think just to kind of walk us through the objectives, I'm going to turn it over to our Senior Director for Career Technical Education, Shamira Bowens, and we'll take it from there. And before I do, Shamira, I'm sorry, I meant to mention, we are joined, we have, of course, our Superintendent and our Secretary of Labor and our Interim Secretary of Higher Education with us today. We're also joined by Assistant Secretary for Workforce Development and Adult Learning, Erin Roth. Her team houses the apprenticeship agency, and of course is going to be driving a lot of the apprenticeship expansion and employer engagement sides of the high school registered apprenticeship expansion work. So we're grateful to have her with us to join the conversation today too. And with that, Shamira.
Thank you, Rachel, for that background and refresher on the CTE implementation vision. So these are our three primary goals. This plan is grounded in three core objectives that are essential to achieving our joint CTE vision and making progress toward the blueprint's 45% goal. First, we're focused on increasing employer engagement to expand high school level registered apprenticeship. So our partnership with Assistant Secretary with Maryland State Department of Labor, EWDAL team. Next, we have, this includes transitioning existing youth apprenticeship programs to formal registered apprenticeship programs, as well as supporting the LEAs and becoming apprenticeship sponsors and making targeted apprenticeship investments like the $5 million in intermediary development and leveraging MAIP to grow and sustain these opportunities. Our second goal is we're focused on removing barriers for students and increasing awareness about registered apprenticeships. Additionally, we know access isn't about availability, it's all about whether students can realistically participate. And with that, so we're exploring options and solutions around scheduling flexibility, transportation, as well as ensuring students and families are aware of both apprenticeship and credential pathway opportunities. And third, we're focused on modernizing our data systems and the infrastructure. That includes building a public-facing dashboard to track progress. We'll also be exploring ways to integrate apprenticeship opportunities directly into tools that students are currently using in their schools, as well like Naviance and Zello. And lastly, together, these efforts are about expanding access, reducing barriers, and making sure we have the systems in place to track progress and drive results. So Rachel, I'm gonna hand it back to you so you can talk about the how.
Thank
And
you.
how the data works in this space.
Yes, so this kind of, to show you just again, where we are now, against that target a few years out. These really break down the numbers for you. And so we have numbers from the most recent prior school year, number of IRC completers and estimated number of high school registered apprenticeship completers. And so you'll see where if on 45% on net, we're at about 23 to almost 24% right now. That being said, the apprenticeship piece of the goal is we've reestablished it. As you can see, lots of growth needed to get to where we need to be between that 99 and that 4,553. I tried to do like a multiplier math on it when I was ad-libbing this at a different presentation and I failed completely, so I won't try. I need to do that math at some point, but that's of course a significant increase, right? It's a big push, unprecedented, really anywhere in this country. And something I know we're all really committed to seeing a lot of real growth toward. So to get us toward this, we're tasked and required with, I think a good action to take, which is actually breaking this down to what we have to try to do every year to get there. So teams across agencies did some math to kind of figure out, okay, what would each year maybe look like? And so I did want to kind of just acknowledge, that as this is being put together and ultimately the final plan is put in front of the group, we will have those annual targets at the state level established and some questions for discussion later on when and how we go about socializing with our local areas and working on the local level targets we're required to set as well. As far as some of the how we're going to get there, we can go to the next slide, just to kind of preview some of what's in the executive summary and some of the sort of types of conversations we want to have today. We know that there are major investments happening across the state and actions being taken to work toward this goal already happening in our agencies, right? Because this isn't the first day we're talking about it. We've been starting to work on this with different kind of disparate implementation plans for a long time. I say a long time, 2 years, I guess, not that long in the grand scheme of things, but That being said, we know that the Department of Education is already doing some phenomenal work around reimagining career and technical education, programs of study, and what those pathways look like, how they structure together toward graduation, looking at career connected learning and how that can be structured and acknowledged toward graduation in alignment with these policies on registered apprenticeship and industry recognized credentials. And we also know that the Department of Labor and the government, really the entire administration with support of the governor's office has made some significant new investments in expanding registered apprenticeship, and they're really thinking about how they can target and tailor some of those investments to support expansion for registered apprenticeship in high schools. And so I know I'm sure some of that will come through in our conversation today. But these are some of the types of points of feedback that we're looking for through this conversation, is really understanding, first, employer engagement. We know that everything is going to begin and end with employer engagement on this. And so we know we need to touch on that today. We want to talk about commitments we can generate from agencies and members here, how we can support LEAs in setting those district level targets, really talk about if we had to pick some of the just biggest obstacles we have to tackle in policy, legislation, resources, what should we be prioritizing and how can this committee support that? And then finally, making sure, we all have a clear picture of how this is aligned to that broader expansion goal, because the state is also looking to expand registered apprenticeship across the board for everyone. So that's kind of the preview, I think, of the conversation we're looking to have today. And so I think we can kind of pause here for actual live discussion now. Starting with this first question, I think I'd love to maybe, open up the floor for a discussion of employer engagement, really recognizing that linchpin for reaching this goal. And first, maybe just for the Department of Labor speak a bit about some of the things already underway, but really just want to kind of hear from the committee on what we think we're missing, what we need here.
I'm happy to open up. First, I just want to express to our colleagues on the screen, I'm so sorry you're not here because we are in WorkSource Montgomery, which is one of my favorite places to visit in the state. So thank you to the team at this big job center for hosting us. I was downstairs earlier today and it was buzzing, right? People are coming in, they're searching online, they're looking for new opportunities. And so, it's always wonderful to see the incredible hard work that the team is doing in action. I do think talking about this is really timely because we were earlier today talking with some career counselors in the county and just really trying to think about employer engagement is the hard part, right? Just getting people involved, and the department has, we've built out this entire team of navigators, apprenticeship navigators, whose sole mission is to reach out to employers to try to drive them towards apprenticeship. I'll let Erin speak more to some of the incentives, including around high school level apprenticeship, we're really trying that, intermediaries, other things. But I think what we really want to hear from is, because we have a diverse set of stakeholders, it's I really want to hear from you all. It can not speak for everybody, yes.
I think, yes,
The public have thoughts, they can share them too.
Yeah,
That's up to the. Yes, up to the board chair, but I know we're here and have a lot of experienced stakeholders in the room and online too, so I think we really want to hear from you all about that, but Erin, I wanted to speak a little bit some of the incentives.
Sure. Well, good afternoon, and it's great to be here. Thank you so much for the conversation. I would say, as we think about the goal of how to increase high school level of registered apprenticeship, a linchpin priority within that goal of reaching high schoolers is thinking about our broader registered apprenticeship strategy and how we are going to significantly scale and expand opportunities within the trades, beyond the trades, and really taking a data informed approach too. So Secretary Wu mentioned that we have added a lot of people power, but we know that that's an important piece, but not the only piece. And so last year, many of you around the room, of course, know that we were able to pass the Hallmark Raise Act, which is a big apprenticeship effort. The Apprenticeship 2030 Commission and all sorts of stakeholders really helped to align on what would make sense in order to bring apprenticeship to scale in our state and those solutions that come with it. And I think know that employers are the key, right? And so the RAISE Act allows for us to advance some of our employer-focused strategies. So we have $10 million this fiscal year that we've invested in 2 programs. Just for example, we have a pay per apprentice incentive. And so it's a broader apprenticeship opportunity where we have intentionally put more emphasis and prioritization on the high school level of registered apprenticeship. So for example, any employer can go for $3,000 7 months after they've brought somebody on board. That is the pay for the outcome aspect of the project that I think is really meaningful. So we will obligate the funds, but then we will actually hold on providing those funds until 7 months after that apprentice has been in the opportunity. But for high school level, because we know that, there's additional steps that have to be taken, we're actually providing $7,500 per apprentice at the high school level for an employer to cover things like related instruction costs, startup costs, the things that might disincentivize somebody starting and entering that work. So that's one opportunity that's out there right now. We've obligated about $500,000 of the 5 million. So if you're sitting here listening and this is the first year hearing of it, we welcome your partnership and being ambassadors for getting the word out. We also believe that intermediaries can be a really important model. We heard a lot from the employer community that, in Maryland, we have a lot of small and medium-sized businesses, and it may not be as easy as it could be to plug in. And we've seen great success with intermediaries in other countries and other parts of the country, and some here in Maryland too. So we took a data-informed approach to really look at what does the data say in terms of where are the jobs going to be in the next 5 years, and then layer in does apprenticeship offer a solution for a business, because it has to make business sense for a business to sign on. And we identified about a handful of specific sectors that really focus in that $5 million investment. I'm excited to see what we get on May 8th when that solicitation closes. I anticipate a lot of quality applications coming through, perhaps even trying to figure out how we can go beyond that $5 million investment should it make sense. But so those are a few things that we're doing. And in the intermediary one, I'll just mention too, to emphasize what we're here today about high school level of registered apprenticeship, that we have actually prioritized that as a strategy too. So we're trying to leverage the broader apprenticeship investments we have to push and move the needle for high schoolers in our state.
I have a couple of questions. So, of the 500,000 that's already been distributed, do you have a sense for how much of that is employers that are already in apprenticeship, like they already know apprenticeship?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm happy to follow up and provide that information to the committee. But we did provide, so we had a project that was a paper apprentice model that was a federal grant that taught us a lot. And so one of the things that we, I think, learned through that experience, which did move the needle, but which made us pause, are we incentivizing uptake, or are we rewarding people who are already doing good apprenticeship work? And so we really tried to tailor the parameters of that money to incentivize change behavior and uptake. So I believe that we're doing that, but I'd be happy to provide the information.
Yeah, it's just a question, because again, what we're trying to do is expand.
Yeah.
Then, are we getting there, I guess? And then on the intermediary side, is there, and I know this isn't, the call is open now, but is there a sense of accountability so for intermediaries that are awarded this money, is there some sort of accountability lens that says, okay, you're going to drive?
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, they gotta get employers to wanna take advantage of, right? So I'm just wondering where that responsibility sits.
Great comment, Madam Chair. And when we served on the Apprenticeship 2030 Commission together, that came up a lot, right? When we looked at how should we be thinking about intermediaries? What tasks should they take care of more broadly? What do they do in other states? What does Maryland need? Kind of right sizing all of that for our state. Part of I think my learning through participating in that work was it is going to be critical to make sure if we're putting in these investments that the outcomes are there, and that frankly we don't continue funding if the outcomes aren't there, right? And so I think we've built in those flexibilities as well to really make sure that we're driving success and not just investing a lot of funds that may not materialize in the results we're seeking.
Just a question. I know, Maryland, you commented on this. Maryland has a lot of small and medium-sized businesses. And I know in other states, they've kind of solved this by doing coalition models where employers who are small and medium-sized businesses, they really can't take on that. Because apprenticeship is heavy administratively, let's just say that. So I was wondering, do we implement something like that here? How have we been able, or have we been able to bring more small businesses on by looking at them more like a coalition of employers that can kind of work and learn from each other to kind of drive apprenticeship?
It's a great point, and that is exactly what we hope that intermediary investment will do. So it will, just if we're taking a healthcare example, we would hope that they focus in on what occupations the healthcare employers in our state need, coalesce around, the coalition of the health employers that have a similar need working together. And so that it does, I think eliminate a lot of that administrative burden on the employer so they can focus on running their business and have the intermediary support, whether they're serving in the sponsor role or really recruiting employers and talking the language that employers, will resonate to.
To me, I think
And,
that this is exactly what I think we have to do here. Like, there has to be a strategy that is industry driven, and it's not just for small and mid-sized businesses. The, like, if you take not healthcare specifically, although I think that that's certainly true, but life sciences, we have a number of life sciences companies in the state. Having talked with several of them, they have the same needs, they have the same roles that are apprenticeable, they have. That, to me, that's what I would love to see us have, is a strategy that says, here is how we are going sector by sector, understanding what the. Understanding, to your point, Aaron, I totally agree. What is the value proposition? What, so in my, informal conversations with several of these employers, I said, why do you do apprenticeship? Like, why, tell me in your words. And they're like, well, yeah, it's retention. We, in these roles, we have a hard time keeping people. So they do know, but somebody has to be like, waking up every day thinking about that, about like, how are we bringing those together? And if it's life sciences, how does that industry segment in terms of size of company? And what does that mean about it,
Yeah, and I know, coming from a very large employer, we have the ability to make investments in staffing and technology and all of the things to help run apprenticeship. So while either intermediary is great to have, we can create a long-term kind of like spectrum of how we can manage this once an intermediary is gone. I don't know if small and medium businesses are in the same spot. And so there needs to be a way to keep them guided and helped together. And maybe it is large businesses being a part of that contribution and part of that change. But I do think that there's a different need at different levels. Like, I can go to my training curriculum department and say, I need a training curriculum for apprenticeship and these are the metrics.
Yeah, but if you're.
They will write it.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's not gonna happen.
If you're 100-person business, you don't have that.
You don't have that.
That's right.
Yeah, so I think that the needs are different, and I also think that it's great for large businesses to participate alongside small and medium businesses because they show them where they could be long-term. But I also think there are times when we need to separate those. And the reason we need to separate those is because one group needs something different than the other group. And large businesses can tend to push
Their agenda.
over the small and medium businesses. So how do you balance that appropriately?
Yeah.
I've seen this work at intermediaries, like Washington State Technology Industry Association runs a large set of apprenticeships in the IT and cyber world. And what happens there is sometimes the large employers say, I want my own cohort, right? Because I have things I specifically want for me, so it's like a cybersecurity overlay, but I have specific things I want all, AWS people to learn. And so then, whereas there might be mixed cohorts for other reasons.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brian, I saw you.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like we're talking about group programs, which, in my world.
Yeah,
There's lots of with group programs we could take, and construction is there, but there's other industries that have group programs, and whether, joint programs like I have, where it's just one trade with the union that has all of these signatory employers, or non-joint, which like the Associated Builders and Contractors, which has all of the trade, right, and a whole bunch of employers. That is a way to learn from those examples and get those into these industries that they're not there yet. I mean, it's gotta be fairly easy. From my point, I understand apprenticeship.
Yeah.
It's the employers that I would need to understand to be able to help them build that, but between me and Chris, Aaron, everybody else, we could help get that done. I mean,
Well, how, so the staff expansion, the navigators that have been added, like, what are they waking up every day thinking about? Because in my mind, that extra capacity would be focused on exactly this. But that may not be the case. So how should we think about?
I think you're correct. I think all these resources have to work tightly coordinated so that, we made the intentional decision to have our staff spread geographically, but to cross-pollinate with our sector-focused team and within themselves so that we're making sure that those opportunities are happening while they're relationship building, because that's the other piece, is we know it's really important to have that opportunity to like really be, like, it's not gonna be a one-time conversation, I guess is the best way to say it, to jump into apprenticeship, generally speaking, right? And so, we know that the community of economic developers, working with commerce, working with like employers and the chambers, that's a really important part of the strategy. I think the other part is really making sure that we're taking in, the job market. And so we have provided targets for each of our navigators in terms of how many businesses they're interacting with, like how many sponsors, how many employers. We're also able to offer, like, this was always something we wanted to do, but I didn't have the bandwidth when we just had a handful of staff. They had to mostly focus on compliance things, right? So we were just able to be out there with businesses and providing that concierge like service much differently. And we do, have expectations for the staff to meet certain goals. I think we're looking at figuring out, like, to your question about the sectors, like, what is the right balance of the geographic push and the sectoral push. So I welcome thought partnership and making sure that we're thinking about that in all the right ways. But those are some things. So like, I think we're still in a building phase, but it's really starting to take off. We're able to do like sector focused webinars routinely now. And so we can make sure that this committee has all that information. And we have, a tight pitch deck. So I think that's the other piece is like, I'd welcome somebody like you, Madam Chair, to let us pitch you and give us some tough feedback if that's what it looks like. But I think that's what it'll take to just make sure we're meeting the mark and securing the extra, growing.
That's kind of the next question I have. Now that you're able to get out in the community, how are we tracking a database saying like when employers say no and why they say no, so that we have a better idea of how to address those gaps? Because we may see similarities over time now that you have the bandwidth to be out. Do we have a centralized way of tracking and monitoring that and just kind of identifying like this is the employer feedback on why they couldn't move forward or they explored it, but they couldn't go this way?
So I don't want to monopolize all of the time, but I'll just answer quickly if I may, that I think we have a legacy technology problem with apprenticeship that we're working to actively overhaul right now. So it's very exciting because I think it'll allow for many more self-services, a lot of efficiencies, a lot of that type of tracking that is frankly in file cabinets at headquarters and is not doing anybody on the Eastern Shore any favors, right? So we are modernizing that infrastructure. So I think we will get there. But in the meantime, we don't want to just wait for, that overhaul. And so the team, we have regional managers. I guess I should have started there. Sorry. So our navigators each report up into one of 3 regional managers. And those teams coalesce. They come together as managers. They come together as the navigators within that regional managers team all together. And so I think there's that level of information sharing that we can do and learn from each other and make sure we're connecting the right dots too, so that every employer is not going their own and can build cohesively.
Thank you.
More to be done there, for sure.
Yeah, and I really appreciate your comment about, because, technology implementation always takes twice as long as you think it's going to. Usually costs twice as much as you think it's going to. And there's probably like low lift, not perfect ways to, spreadsheets, just capturing, like, we should not miss out on that gold, I guess, in terms of the feedback, because, just personally, you guys know, I was like on a soapbox over and over again about somebody needs to wake up every day thinking about employer demand. And I was so happy when, labor said, we're on it, we're gonna do it.
We're all in.
And so, I think having this committee really understand like what is the strategy, because I think of this like, there are industries that already know apprenticeship. So there's an expansion. That is a typical sale, expand your market. That's an expand your market strategy. How do we get more employers in the industries that already know how to do this, right? That is a different strategy from disruptive innovation. We're industries that do not have, and that is, this is just one person's opinion, but in my, and now having had some of these conversations myself, that strategy is gonna require, it's more like you gotta do a lot of customer discovery, you've got to start, it's not just having one-on-one conversations with employers, we will not get there. It is like, how do we bring folks together in real, meaningful, meaty conversations? It won't just happen via education, it won't just happen, because this is truly what you're trying to do, is find product market fit.
Yes.
And that takes like in the weeds, like if I were in an industry, like, I don't even know that I could give you feedback on the pitch deck. I would, because I don't think we're at a pitch deck point in industries that don't have apprenticeship. We're at a point where we need to like really orchestrate those conversations to understand what are your workforce challenges? Where are you struggling? How do you think about solving that today? what are your current strategies for filling workforce gaps? So that we can then think about, all right, what is that, if you take the apprenticeship model, how does that need to maybe shift 3 clicks to the left to, you know what I mean? Like, how do you make it work for the thing? So that's, I know I'm a broken record, but I just think
It's helpful. I'm picturing this visual and I feel that I won't do it justice, but I'll make sure that you have it. But we've broken our sales pitch essentially down into 3 segments, exactly as you're describing, and there's a visual. Perhaps we might even consider incorporating it into the document.
Yeah.
Because again, it's our broader strategy, but it's important for high school level of apprenticeship as well. But I hear you and I agree.
And I really appreciate your points, Chair Norton, obviously coming at this from the post-secondary education perspective, which is, I think, just important to recognize. And as I think about, so the 2 just quick pieces of feedback, I'm a broken record on leveraging the Maryland Longitudinal Data System Center. I think as folks know, so if we think about tracking long-term outcomes, I hear you don't have perfectly that, but good. Let's have some small wins building up to bigger progress, but just how do we leverage MLTSC? And then when we think about employer engagement, coming from the higher ed side, I often have the question of like, what credential is it that you need from us? And I don't know, I'd be curious how we get employers to answer that question, because it seems like they tend to say some types of degrees. And I think we're trying to shift that conversation here in the state to say there is a variety of credentials that could benefit and help you address your workforce demand. And when you said apprenticeable, that really got me thinking of like, well, what does that conversation look like if you're currently requiring a non-credit or a certificate or an associate's degree? What does that transition look like? So that's just a question that I have of like, how do you train people to think about this as apprenticeable? Right now
Yes.
here, we've done the credential creep. We went in the opposite direction. We've asked everyone to have bachelor's degrees, even though that's not appropriate for the field that they need. But then how do we ask this kind of question of like, yeah, what is apprenticeable and what does that look like?
See, I love what you're saying right here, because I think we throw jargon after jargon after jargon in these conversations. When what we need to do is take a step back and say, you're an employer, you gotta hire people, like your whole business is built on people and technology. I mean, that's basically, so what are you struggling with? Like, forget about, let's not ask the question about what credentials do you need or what, stop about. What are you facing? Are you struggling?
Right.
Is it like, actually, we're downsizing our workforce, we're not, okay, then we need to know that, like, and we need to have those conversations to get to where we're trying to get, because we might be asking the wrong questions, right? Like, if we're asking what credentials do you need, an employer may not know
That's right.
how to engage in that conversation.
Yeah, ultimately, credentialing is such an evolution, right? Because the credentials that I need today are not the credentials that I need tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so having people take a deep thought into what are the type of people I need, what are the skills and competencies that I need.
Yes.
Yeah, I can get them credentials if they come equipped with these skills and these competencies.
That's right.
Yeah,
Right? And so
Yeah.
that's where I think your discussion makes a lot of sense. How do we deep dive and get people at that level, that deep level of what do they need at their core?
Mm-hmm.
And then many people can help alongside the other teams to build the credentialing that the individual needs to do the work.
well, and this is where your point about, small, mid-sized businesses being, so. Small, mid-sized businesses often have a lot more flexibility around, like, you're at a big, tens of thousands of people, then yeah, there's all these, like, here is the career architecture and this has been from 1985, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and so that's a little bit harder to maneuver sometimes. In the smaller, mid-sized businesses, there is, I think, less of that. So it's figuring out all of those pieces, but having the conversation about the real, like not about all the associated stuff.
Yeah.
I think it takes a lot of active listening and research before you enter the conversation on a company and really understanding like, what are they? I mean, that's exactly what we try to, as we're listening, think, is apprenticeship the right solution? Like, does it take a year to master this in terms of skills? Do they have an attraction issue, a recruitment issue, a training issue, a retention issue? And how do we solve for that through apprenticeship? And sometimes when we go through that, it may not be an apprenticeship fit, but it often is. But it does require that, again, it can't be a one and done conversation, and we start with listening.
And I also think we need to look at apprenticeship as a multiple tiered thing. I think a lot of times we think of it as just bringing talent into the business, but it could be also accelerating talent that's already in the business that are residents of the state. So how do I take my hourly colleagues and turn them into my salary colleagues over a period of time, and then creating the bandwidth to hire more individuals? And so I think not a lot of employers think about it as an incumbent strategy. They are, it's communicated out from the offices as a way to acquire talent, but not a way to build talent. So I think if you're coming at people in those both ways, you're going to get more people
That's right.
involved in.
Yeah, it's your overall workforce, what overall, how are you thinking about that? And then understanding where, apprenticeship could be.
Because for my company, it may not, it may not fit, not my company in particular, because we do a lot of hiring, but let's say it was a different company, it may not be a good fit for me to hire apprentices directly in. However, I have a pool of, hourly colleagues or low wage colleagues that have been here for a year, and now I can.
It's a growth
strategy.
Yeah.
And so when you only market it one way, those employers that don't need hiring support just walk away. They just walk away.
Yeah, that's right. One thing that I really wanted to underscore that you said, Erin, because I think this is really important, and I want to say this at the CTE committee, where yes, we are focused on blueprint, but I completely agree with, I'm gonna underscore it, you were probably being nice about this, but we can't have two separate, there's not like a high school level of a registered apprenticeship strategy. That's just crazy town, because employers do not want to hear from two different people about the same thing. So this is, and we all here need to appreciate that and be supportive of that for this to work, there is a growing apprenticeship strategy for the state. And if you just look at the numbers, we know that to really achieve the kind of growth that we're looking for, we have to move apprenticeships down into high school. But we also need to be clear that we need to have a united, or a single voice going to employers, because again, that will frustrate them if they're like, I'm in this conversation over here about apprenticeships, and I'm in this conversation over here about high school level of registered apprenticeship. Yeah, we can't do that. So I just.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, we cannot lead with, hey, we think you should bring on a 16-year-old, and so that's not where the apprenticeship conversation starts, right? Because we do really need to show that value proposition, and then layer in, have you considered this population that makes a lot of sense for X, Y, and Z reasons? Thank you for saying that.
I think this is great, and I hate to have to move us on in the interest of time, but I'm gonna try my best to summarize what I think I'm getting out of what it means for where we're going next with this plan. Recognizing the plan won't capture everything under the sun, but there's some key things we need in it so that we can use it as that accountability tool with each other to keep driving toward progress. And frankly, it sounds like through this conversation, also task ourselves with doing some things even, within that plan. So I think one, the themes in this conversation around employer engagement are really centering on the idea that like we need to really understand and be clear and have a shared story across the types of people sitting here. And I know Commerce isn't at the meeting today, but also with our Department of Commerce colleagues out there doing business development around one, how we're organizing as a state, what our message is around the apprenticeship opportunity and how this fits within that, and also how we're asking and leveraging employers and organizing themselves around their talent needs and sharing that with the state. And I know we do that through many of our local partners, or, of course, for example, we're here in Montgomery County, and Workforce Montgomery has some fantastic sector partnerships. Employers, they engage as networks to have ongoing conversations around skill needs, starting at that skill level conversation, right? So we have some opportunities to do that at the state level. I think we need to work into this plan. A couple things that we're working on, things like healthcare, life sciences, where we're going to be able to set some tables like that and actually design together and really pressure test along with our partnerships committee and our partners around the table. Some of these things we talked about, right? How to have some of these conversations, but we need to get out of those conversations to start building models that are responsive. We're going to need to fold in the apprenticeship strategy, not recreate it, not necessarily have every single thing in there in the interest of being focused and succinct, but really highlight the pieces that articulate the structure, how navigators, by region are focusing within sectors within their regions and what their goals look like. Working on sort of pitch partnership. I heard you, Erin, kind of mention that, and I think we do have the benefit of having a board of really, smart members on these issues, and also, of course, our commerce colleagues to kind of partner on that business pitch. And really making sure that we're providing good feedback there. I think when it comes to commitments, there's also a great chance for this committee and for the board, if I may go so far, to really make commitments as members too, right? Like, is every member company or education organization on this committee involved in registered apprenticeship? I think we're really close to 100%, if not 100%. Then let's look at the board. They're a great test case, right? Or great use cases, and more of our members have been starting to engage registered apprenticeship for their business needs too, as we go through this work. But thinking of those types of commitments on our side as well, I think needs to be part of this plan. I heard you on Longitudinal Data System Center. And really, I actually just double back on apprenticeship strategy until my notes are messy. I like drew a lot of arrows as we were talking. Really focusing on this joint apprenticeship, group apprenticeship approach, leveraging intermediary investment, not just as this investment, but also to share learning. Your team will be learning through that investment, share that learning here and with our board so that we understand where we need to reinvest and double down, shift gears, how we can be supportive as, policy thought partners, advocates, all of those things. And some elements of the pitch that were really called out here around skills, sustainability for small and mid-sized businesses, thinking about what it looks like for them. And then also thinking about that upskilling versus new hire. I think all of those are pieces that we can articulate, I think, in a fairly tight way and connect some dots on in this strategy. That's going to, again, include some assignments. I think that we'll then be coming back to, once we land on this in June, coming back to starting the November meeting and moving from there. Did I miss anything big? I tried so hard to do like a 2-minute summary of that conversation. I'm grateful it's recorded. I'm really glad it's all recorded too. Okay, good. All right. So looking at our agenda, I need to catch up to where we are in our agenda now. Thank you, legislative sessions. There we go. All right, switching gears, legislative session. We made it, and it was. I'll start there. Everyone here is still standing. Congratulations. Wanted to, of course, circle back on some things that we shared earlier this year with the committee around legislation that does impact our work, and then preview some other kind of things going on recently related to all this with the AIB as well, and our expert review team visits. So starting with session, Senate Bill 311, House Bill 490. This is one we've been talking about, I think, almost since I got here, and we finally were able to make this happen. We were able to, very rarely we want to eliminate requirements for ourselves, I think, in legislation, but we were able to eliminate a requirement that we as a body had kind of determined just was a little bit redundant, didn't necessarily make sense or serve the ultimate purpose of the work. And that was to have an additional subcommittee of the CTE Committee, the Skills Standards Advisory Committee. It was tasked with certain responsibilities, some of which made sense, some of which maybe weren't totally, right sized to the times by the time we started really implementing the blueprint. And so we were able to shift it a little bit, still retain those responsibilities that make sense, and align that with some other statewide work that we're doing. So really grateful to the AIB and others for their partnership, really glad that this worked out. And basically what we did is we made sure that we are still responsible, we still have a role in supporting and setting statewide guidance on occupational standards. Particularly as they relate to CTE programs and how apprenticeship standards are connecting to CTE programs. So we do have a role in supporting that process and specifically in making sure that we are, to the extent relevant and feasible, really aligning investments where there's need for businesses and real ROI for workers. And that's in the high skill, high wage or in demand occupations. Workforce Pell, which, you know, as board members, you all have heard me talk about a little bit, really quite a bit recently, as recently as last week. Called on us as a board to set these definitions. And we, of course, at Maryland are taking that as a chance to align around those definitions at a state level for things like Perkins, for things like our Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act investments through our workforce system. By the way, I'll just, while I'm here, this wasn't in my talking points team, I'm sorry, but it is out for, that policy is out for public comment. The definitions are part of that. So as we're thinking about those definitions, think about how they, if you're commenting out there, members of the public, please think about how these definitions might apply across systems. But we did kind of double down on that element that was sort of hinted at in the previous legislation. We made it really clear that that is a role the board will play in aligning around those assessments. So grateful that we don't have to have another subcommittee. Really, this doesn't change much about our work plan as far as, like, you know, what we're focused on as a committee, because we're doing this year. All of that stays on track. I talked about Workforce Pell briefly already, but it is worth noting, this bill also passed. This supports our state's registered apprenticeship goals and also our Workforce Pell grant implementation. Senate Bill 509 essentially functioned primarily as a state level mirror of what's in the draft federal regulations, which already really favored registered apprenticeship, really worked to essentially make it easier to approve registered apprenticeships where, you know, a related instruction component is being delivered through an eligible institution for Workforce Pell, meaning a student who's Pell eligible could use it for the related instruction in the registered apprenticeship. It went a step further and actually also said that a program can count on the job training hours as well toward this eligibility. So if the apprenticeship program doesn't have a minimum 150 hours as required in Workforce Pell, just related instruction, some of the on-the-job training, if appropriately supervised, can count. And so there's a lot more to unpack there. But the good news is, in short, this helps make it feasible for Workforce Pell to support a registered apprenticeship. We've mirrored that in our draft policy that is now out for comment, and we're really grateful to, I think, be the only state right now with a budget from its state legislature, really from anyone, to actually support implementation, personnel required, maybe some initial other data elements required. And in parallel to this, we're also working with our higher education and community college colleagues on their application to a federal grant that can support institutions in expanding eligible programs and expanding our capacity to implement this. So I share this in front of this committee to acknowledge it's going to start out really as a pretty small tool. I think, you know, in terms of how many students it's really serving in the first year or two, but looking to scale that over time. And this is one more tool in toolbox on our registered apprenticeship strategy, among other things. Any questions on those? Okay. We have a slide on failed bills. I won't go through all these in detail, I think, in the interest of time, but we did just want to kind of put these here on the screen. We didn't spend a lot of time talking about these as a committee. But just for awareness, there were a couple that we were, you know, honestly, I think in one case here on the left, actually concerned it might create some redundancies. And so I think it kind of worked for us as far as we're concerned that this one didn't proceed as planned or as written. And then on the right, House Bill 029, we were looking at how that might impact student participation rates in some of these pathways that we're really focused on talking about through the blueprint. And so we were kind of keeping track of this one. That one did not pass session either. So just wanted to kind of also highlight those two briefly. Any questions or comments, or team, anything I missed that we wanted to highlight on these two? Great. Fewer redundant requirements, more implementation resources is the bullet point for us in this team. So that's great. I'll call that a couple wins. And I think with that, we can move on from legislative session. And Shamir is going to talk to us a little bit more about some recent developments with our work in the AIB around our Arthur review team plans.
Can I just?
Yes.
I just want to extend my gratitude to you and your team, particularly on Workforce Pell. You know, that's one of the biggest changes in federal financial aid over 50 years, coupled with changes to Pell in and of itself. That's exciting. Some changes to loans, not as exciting. I would offer just the work that you've done, especially nationally with the negotiated rulemaking. I know that we felt like we were in good hands, but also for leadership. So really excited to see that move forward.
Thank you. I didn't pay to do that, but thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Rachel. Such a robust conversation and lots of takeaways for us to move forward. I'll catch us up and give a brief refresher on some important updates about the CTE expert review team. All right, I'll start with just the overview of where we are right now in terms of phase one. Due to the hiring freeze, as some of you may have known, we were not fully able to execute phase one as originally scheduled, including report publications, the post-visit reports that are required, or not required, but post-visit reports that we were producing for the LEAs after our CTE ERT visits, as well as other required functions within other work that we're required to do as a committee. So as a reminder, as of school year 25-26 deployment plan, which included 11 LEA visits to complete phase one of our baseline across all 24 LEAs. To date, we have completed 17 LEAs and 17 LEA visits and 30 schools within those 17 visits. Remember what slide is this slide? Okay, so 11 visits, 30 schools within those visits, 17 LEAs, 30 schools, I'm sorry. So with that, given these constraints, staff had to make a difficult decision to adjust timelines for both scheduling visits as well as completing those post-visit reports, including post-visit reports from school year 24-25. And to address this and ensure a clear path forward for completing phase one, we worked closely with the AIB to make adjustments to the next steps for the ERT process. Slide, thank you. So according to the adjustments, and after our March 2026 presentation at the AIB board meeting, we presented on the status to date of the ERT, key findings, and then considerations for a path forward. So following that discussion with the AIB, they approved a set of adjustments to the phase one timeline. The visits originally scheduled for the spring 2026 will now be completed in the fall of 2026-2027 school year. And you'll see the specific counties that we will be visiting right here on this slide. And total 5 LEA visits will be completed during the school year. And this is now a clear expectation for reporting time. There is a clear expectation for reporting times after each visit. And with that, we are required to complete those post-visit reports within 3 months, 12 weeks of each visit, as well as completing all the reports for visits that were held in the fall of 2025 by June 30th. I'd like to note that we will be visiting Prince George's County Public Schools, LEA, in May, next week, May 6th, 2026, as one of our visits this spring. All right, so based on the guidance from the AIB, again, I mentioned we'll complete the other 6 visits in the fall. That we'll work on, we won't move towards the phase 2 deployment plan in the next school year because we're going to take our findings from our phase 1 and present some recommendations in collaboration with the LEA to legislators about potential changes that may need to happen to support the CTE ERT program. We'll also incorporate the phase 1 findings into a longer term strategy for the ERT program. And over the summer and fall of 2026, our team will work closely with the AIB to develop an informed recommendation on the structure and timelines for resuming the ERT visits as well as future school visits. And any proposed modifications to the MSDE and CTE Committee ERT structure will then be put forward, as I mentioned, by the AIB for the 2027 legislative session.
So I just want to ask a question. Sure, we don't necessarily need legislation for most changes, right? And it seems like a kind of heavy
We do need legislation for some of the changes around annual goals and timing, so that was laid out, but very specifically and critically.
Oh, you mean just like those specifics around some of the time for the final things?
Some of the timing for final things and how many visits we're supposed to do a year, physical visits, yeah. Yes, yeah.
Okay, so here on the screen, you'll see a map. I won't go through in detail with this for the sake of time. But again, I've mentioned this already that we visited 17 LEAs. out of 24, 30 total. These visits are, the structure of the CTE ERT visits are typically a one-day process with a team of approximately 10 to 12 members, including our staff as well as cross-sector partners represented on the ERT. And then each visit includes multiple focus groups, as well as key stakeholders, CTE and LEA administrators, CTE instructors, also an opportunity for LEA leadership to participate in some of these focus groups to ensure that we're capturing a range of perspectives. And while we have not yet met the annual 10% target as laid out in statute, with the outline plan to address over time through additional staffing, which is currently in progress, to hire a new manager to support the team and the capacity, we'll be more in a position to streamline the visits and the structure. And with this plan pause that we're currently in right now, we have the opportunity to work closely again in collaboration with the AIB and reassess and strengthen this model, just ensuring that we're all aligned with the intent of the blueprint and it's supported by the level of resources needed for effective implementation and just quality visits overall. Next slide, please. So you may have seen this slide before. I won't go into it in depth. And again, I mentioned, again, this is just another slide that'll show how we were planning to do phase one and move to phase two and phase three. And again, this has shifted as we pause phase one and we'll finalize that in the fall of 2026. So if we can move forward here. All right. So again, a reminder, phase one was the discovery phase, and that was over multiple school years. And then the goal is just the goal of phase one was just to establish a baseline and an understanding of both local strengths and systemic barriers by visiting all the LEAs. And this was done again through field-based operations, observations, and data collection to identify opportunities for technical assistance and potential policy shifts around CTE and where it's most needed. And at the same time, we were identifying and uplifting best practices across the system, and these findings will directly inform the approach and the targets for phase two. Slide. All right. I kind of mentioned this already with the one-day structure and how we facilitate and execute the the CTE ERT visit. So I won't go into it in depth, but it is a very heavy lift with pre-visit meetings. LEAs are required to provide data in advance. We're also offering orientation, presentations, and opportunities to prepare the CTE visit members to join us. Then there's the one-day visit. And the LEA select the schools that we visit, and then again, those focus groups. And then there's more after the post-visit, there is a debrief as well as that post-visit report that we provide to every LEA. And those range between 40 and 85 pages, each depending on what findings we have from each visit, which contributed to the backlog from school year 24-25. I'm happy to announce that all of those reports are complete and published on our website. So kudos to my team for getting those done. All right, next slide. Hard to see the okay. All right, so as we think through the path forward, the committee has an opportunity, again, to restructure this in a way that is effective and efficient for everyone. And our goal is to really use this time intentionally to just shape that model and make sure it's most valuable to the LEAs and supporting the progress for students and educators. And I'd like to pause here to invite your input if you have anything that you want to share from those who have participated in the ERT visits that we should consider moving forward or thinking about your experience that you might want to change.
And phase two, we're basically taking a pause before we launch phase two, right? So, or whatever, toward my personal view is we should look at what we learned from phase one. So we should have a distillation of, you know, what are the themes? What are we seeing? And that, I feel like I would be better equipped to say, okay, having participated in a couple of phase one visits and then seeing what we learned from all of them, what are we really trying to accomplish in phase two and how do we need to adjust as a result?
Yeah, I think it has to align kind of like what our long-term intent is, right? So I've done a couple visits, and those visits were really around hearing the voices of the people in the space. I was not equipped with like statistics or, numbers that we can talk to, and I think long-term, ultimately, that's what we want those to be. So that would be the only thing that I can immediately, off the top of my head, say needs to be incorporated as we move into phase two. But I think that there's more from your learnings, and when we're able to outline those, what you and your team have learned and documented, then we can maybe provide some more recommendations. Anyone else?
Yeah, and I'm kind of thinking out loud a little bit for our team as far as the deliverable back to the committee on this. I think, I know there were summaries of this in the annual report, published at the end of last year, kind of voted out by committee. It sounds like, I think pulling that out really just to some very succinct points, for like real sit down discussion with that right in front of us will be what's helpful to support this conversation. And also maybe a quick capture of feedback we've also asked a similar question of others who participated in visits from other stakeholder groups. And so I'm thinking of just the last conversation I happen to personally be a part of, hearing feedback around, what types of data and how it's passed over, even things like that, where we can make changes that will make it more feasible for LEAs to participate, will make it easier for us to get the data we want our review team members to actually have in front of them, things of that nature, or even ways to structure our visits logistically so that we're able to accomplish more visits, like just some really, interesting, good ideas out there from others, from school districts and employers and whatnot who participated too. So maybe getting some of that kind of just jotted down in like a brief, like I'm thinking of a 2-pager.
Yes.
Iris.
Yeah.
Yeah. Discussion.
Yeah.
Okay. That's fair. Yeah, that's fair.
Is the goal, I mean, these reports that generate a lot of qualitative insights, which is really helpful. But, if the goal is to say at the end, like districts, look, this is where you were doing great, but this is where you could really stand to improve, like, are there like, key metrics or measurables that, like, I know we have the standard ones, but other things around, like, I'm thinking about like or CTE exploration or like or CTE retention or whatever these things are, like, are there ways we're showing people making changes, or like where districts can say like, oh, you say I'm not doing great, oh wait, I'm like in the bottom third of districts, like in this made on this point, I didn't know that. So I was just wondering if that's part of.
I think it's not yet. I believe that was a part of phase 3. At this point, we were just exploring what it looks like and to inform what those metrics may look like in the future. But in the immediate future, currently phase 1 and moving in towards phase 2 is how can we support these LEAs to ensure that they reach those goals or meet those metrics, because we don't know what is really going on across the state around CTE, and so that is where we are right now. But ultimately, that is the purpose of the CTE ERT visits, more later around phase 3-ish in collaboration with the AIB, I imagine.
Yeah, and I think I'll just say it out loud, as a kind of reminder right now, and so this is subject maybe to change the next legislative session as this gets revisited large scale across ERTs, kind of what they look like. But right now, the ultimate goal, and the reason there's kind of phased approach to the build out is because ultimately we're required to run an ERT program in perpetuity for CTE, right? These run forever. And they're meant to be one of the mechanisms through which right now the AIB, eventually some other body, when the AIB doesn't need to exist anymore, where funding decisions get made as a result. And so I'm saying that out loud just for like reminder and awareness, because it's easy to kind of, I think sometimes lose track of that's where we build to through these. I do think point heard on how we can start to show us what that could look like, even in.
Yeah, I think we're having all these conversations, but it's hard to like do all this and then come back in like 2 years and be like, okay,
Wait,
so the
yeah,
metrics,
right.
Like as opposed to.
Like, are we introducing them now? Even if it's the smallest thing, like what percentage are in, RSDs or healthcare or apprenticeships, and then that's just one basic metric. It's just a number, like everyone should be able to have that number. And of course, we want something more in depth long term, but I think introducing them as we see that this is vital, this will be like at the core of what we need to be looking at, I think would help. And then it could also teach us some things about metrics or KPIs that we shouldn't be looking at as we move into phase 3. Like that didn't help us at all, right? So
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think something our team can do, as homework is develop this 2-pager, make sure it includes kind of like some of the key things we've learned qualitatively and some of the metrics we've been looking at quantitatively and some general trend lines there, like where we noticed like some are really high here, like the huge disparities in certain metrics maybe. For what we have, so you get a sense of a feel of what has been in these, and we can kind of take it from there. This, I think, could also be an interim, like even, I know we have a June meeting, then a break, like right now, a longer break before November meetings. So, you know, Madam Chair will work with you to figure out, is this an interim meeting topic, is this kind of an in-between working topic where we don't have to just work together at our meetings, of course, but you know, do a lot of work in between too, so.
Yeah, especially when we talk about bringing together some of the other employer partners that have come to the space. I know they probably have some significant insights that we're,
Yeah.
you know, we may not have here, and having them either in the meeting or documenting their insights in some way, shape, or form that we can review prior to our meeting will allow us to, I think, help to make decisions more broad.
And then you had a comment or?
Oh, I was just thinking, I know that, it's now been, I think about a year since the Board of Education adopted a strategic, so like just going back to metrics, like what are some of the existing metrics?
They're
that are,
already
like,
measuring.
they're already measuring, so we might not necessarily even have to start. I know that Dr. Wright did a great job with that.
Totally.
I don't need to duplicate the wheel if there's already been some of it.
Well, this is great feedback and very helpful for us as we move towards the summer and thinking through what we want phase 2 to look like, as well as getting the early insights in one place from phase 1. All right, I'm gonna shift us to our next part of the meeting, which is our Perkins Reserve Awardees Spotlight. So I wanted to just revisit the Perkins Reserve Grant, which was designed to support local LEAs in testing or expanding innovative solutions to address barriers and achieving key goals under the blueprint, and specifically expanding registered apprenticeship opportunities. So in mid-2025, the CTE Committee partnered with MSDE to co-design this competitive grant using early insights from, again, those CTE ERT visits, and work to help shape the focus areas that applicants applied for under this grant. So MSDE administers the grant, and as a quick refresher, the grant included 4 focus areas, which was related instruction, transportation barriers, as well as supports for special populations and peer collaborations across LEAs. And while the grant allowed for several focus areas, all selected applicants centered their proposals on establishing or expanding high school level registered apprenticeship programs or quality pre-apprenticeship programs that led directly into registered apprenticeships within Maryland public school systems. And so our view is that this reflects where the strongest immediate need and readiness existed, and consistent with early insights from our CTE ERT visits, and where apprenticeship expansion emerged as a common priority across systems. So next slide. And so this slide here, and I won't read it in depth, is also available in your meeting packet as well as our website, but these were the 4 recipients for the 2025-2026 Perkins Reserve Grant, and you'll see here the award amounts and what they centered their application on, and how they're leveraging these funds to expand registered apprenticeship. That's simple. And so with that, I'm very happy to invite Dr. Genevieve Floyd, who represents she's the Director of Department of College and Career Readiness at Montgomery County Public Schools, one of our Perkins Reserve Grant recipients. She's going to share a bit about how Montgomery County is implementing apprenticeship programs, as well as how she's used the Perkins Reserve Grant to increase apprenticeship participation again. So I'll hand it over to you, Dr. Floyd.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. And I appreciate the invitation. I am loving sitting in your midst and hearing you talk about, with such passion and commitment, about the high school level apprenticeship. Believe it or not, I've been in spaces where people are not as passionate about high school level, but you are, and I certainly appreciate the invitation. And when Samara asked if I would come and share, I said yes. Definitely talk about the reserve grant, but there's so much more. There are other grants that I really want you to hear about and understand how we're using it to do the work that we're doing. I'm so sorry that my team is not here. Sean, Davida, and Gwen, they are the core in moving this work forward of the work-based learning team. I would be remiss if I did not shout them out. So I definitely wanted to acknowledge their hard work in this space. Also, in the next slide, I want to start with the date. So for the last 5 years, we've been working towards this goal. We have, in the first year, gone to 450% increase, 190%, 41 and 47. I wanted to focus on the increase before I went to the numbers, because sometimes the percent of increase is more exciting than the numbers. But we're excited about it all, because to go from 2 to 11 is a victory. To go from 11 to almost tripling that in the next year is a victory. And so our overall goal is, how do we create more access and opportunities for students? Not forgetting that we do have a target. That 45% or 25% of the 45% is a real target. And that means for us, by 2030, 2031, we have to have another 2,000% increase. But with the hard work of the Maryland Department of Labor and all the things that you are doing to get us more employers, I'm not stressing about that. I'm still celebrating on the direction we're moving in. And so this is where we have landed 66, even going from the first year of 2 to 66, 3,200% increase. Wouldn't we love to always have those kind of numbers when we're talking about student achievement or student engagement? So again, we're celebrating that. But we recognize that in order to get to where we've gotten and to move forward, we had to make a shift. And so we've shifted the focus from the target of 25% or 45% to the goal of really just work to increase access across the board every year, more students, more high school apprenticeships for them. We've shifted our thinking in that we needed to build a strong infrastructure for this to happen. We had nothing. We didn't have a platform. We didn't have technology. We didn't have the two-way communication. And so in order to really go where we want to go, we had to start with a stronger foundation and lean into technology and the larger ecosystem. We're not here by ourselves. We have a dynamic workforce development board. You heard from some of them earlier today, local cap, simple plug. And they're doing some great things. And we have to lean into that expertise. We have to make those connections and benchmark what others are doing, not just in the state, but around the nation. And they're doing some great things. They are. And then also this idea of apprenticeship by pathway. I love the coalition and the group. And we may be talking the same language, but how do we take advantage of just the larger cohorts that we can get together by bringing more employers together and providing more opportunities for our students? So we've shifted our thinking and our approach to this work, and that's resulted in the data that you saw before. Not only that, there was a strong recognition that we were not getting any additional funding in our local budget. It wasn't happening. And that we needed to leverage the other opportunities that are out there. And so in order to do that, we had multiple grants that we had to seek. And when you look at this slide, you'll see Maryland. We even call D. Perkins, Maryland. So we've relied heavily on the opportunities that have been presented by MSDE, by the Department of Labor, and by other colleagues in order to make this work. And when you add it up, we're talking about over $1.8 million in grant funds for the last 5 years. Reserve grants are part of that. Twice we've been able to secure the Perkins Reserve Grant, but that doesn't tell the totality of the story. So once we've done that, oh, can you go back, Catherine? I do want to make a note. At the very bottom, we also realize that there are individuals out there who can, I believe you mentioned, they can't by themselves secure an apprentice, but they can support the work. And we had individuals who said, how can I support? What can I do? Well, you can make a donation to the MCPS Education Foundation, and that can help us support some related instruction. So that's hyperlinked if any of you want to make a donation. you can certainly do that. And if it's not, I'll give you the updated slide. But we're always looking for funding and we are aggressive and intentional about it. Now, when you go to the next slide, you'll see how I've started to break down the various grants that we have had to secure. And I say had because our local funds, it's just tapped. We are, as you know, I don't have to elaborate on that. So the first one we secured was the IEC, the grant to support $45,000 for our IEC electrical pre-apprenticeship opportunity and also related instruction and transportation. So that was earlier on, and that one you can't see it because, can you shift the heading, Catherine, bring it down a little bit? That's from the Maryland Department of Labor. And sure, yes, got us started and kept going because the next one you'll see is also from the Maryland Department of Labor. That should be about $46,000. This one is actually a school to apprentice, not pre-apprenticeship opportunity, and that was a 3-year grant. And so you saw us going from 2 to 11, but that was vital in getting us up and running. And as you go to the next slide, you'll see the Maryland Lease Grant. This was there were several hundreds of thousands of dollars that was provided to us, and we used $155,000 to secure an individual to help us with the employer outreach. That one individual secured 40 employers in 1 year. We hired her the next year. She's on the local budget. So that was essential, that was needed, and you have to have someone who's dedicated to this work. We didn't have anyone. And as a result, we went from 11, we tripled the amount of those 40 employers, we got 32. Secretary.
So I was wondering if you could speak to, and I see a number of grants because there's a success here, but I was wondering if you could distill, and I wanted to pull on this thread of that point of like, if there are a couple sort of key investments or what you absolutely needed. It sounded like one you were just saying was, you needed a person sort of full-time doing employer recruitment for these opportunities on the school's behalf.
Absolutely.
That was one thing. As we think about, and this committee thinks about other kinds of investment and focus, are there a couple other things that sort of like really rise to the top for you? Or like these are must-haves, or here's a huge gap that we, I wish we had X right now, we just don't have it.
It's all around the human and the financial resources. So outside of the human resources, the financial resources are key. And if there's going to continue to be a pot or a pool from which we can choose to support related instruction, transportation, tools, you'll see these kinds of things bubbling up from the employer.
Yeah, we have this on, so I see.
Yes, yes.
That's what you've been using the grants for.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. What was a large part of the budget came from the Maryland Works Grant. We received, I think that's the next one, Catherine. Yes, over $700,000. And what was critical to success and still is needed now is that platform and infrastructure. We secured a contract with Cooter, and it's a system that allows our students to see them. You're familiar with them? Our students to see the employers, our employers to see the students, parents to see it, staff to see it. It's a whole platform that's dedicated strictly to making those connections and providing those opportunities for students. So it would.
Is that for apprenticeship only or for all work-based?
It's for apprenticeship and internship opportunities. Yes. And without that, did you want to add something, Simone?
I wanted to ask a clarifying question. Then 66 students, is that registered apprenticeships or students at pre-apprenticeship high school?
This is registered apprenticeship.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
And not including youth apprenticeship. Registered.
Thank you.
So it is challenging for us. We're a large school system, and often people say, oh my gosh, Montgomery County, you have so many employees. We do. We have so many dynamic employees, but they're not knocking down our doors to provide the opportunity for students to be 16, 17 and an apprenticeship. But once the word gets out, some of them do gravitate. In fact, it was at a workforce development board meeting where I met a dentist who has now opened up the opportunity for our dental apprenticeship program for our students. So there is a lot, but we heard often, which necessitated this platform from employers. We don't know Who are your students? What are you looking for? What's the process? We don't know what we don't know. Tell us, and then maybe we can see how we can help. And what we realized is that we could not just rely on the labor department to do all of this for us. We needed to do some additional work. So there's primary resources, staffing, and then of course the funding to support an infrastructure, as well as the related instruction, the tools, the transportation, all the other things that goes with supporting these 16 and 17-year-olds and these opportunities. So those are some of the big things from the Maryland Works Grant.
Can I ask you a follow-up questions? Is that okay? I'm glad we got 2 questions early. This is really, no, this is so good. But when you, and haven't been pulling the thread on related instruction cost specifically, could you share a little bit more with the committee about what types of things you had to pay for related instruction? And I ask that because one thing this committee is charged with kind of underlying all of our goals is the idea that CTE and some of the money in the blueprint for CTE can be one resource to support related instruction. I'm curious if that's playing out for you in reality yet, if you see it playing out in the future, what else you've been leveraging resources for related instruction on. Yes, dual enrollment, yeah.
So it can, it's not sufficient.
Okay.
I will say this, because related instruction is employer dependent. They decide what is appropriate. So if they so choose and they say, oh, you went through our CTE construction program, we'll take that as part of the related instruction, great. That's no extra financial impact on us. But if they say, we want you to go through our training, IEC, it's about $2,800 or $3,000. The newest one that I'll share with you now, we're going to talk about later, is the biotech opportunity. And it speaks to what you were sharing earlier. Not all of these opportunities are IRCs. When we met with our industry leaders in the biotech field, they said, we want an associate's degree. So some of the Perkins Reserve Grant goes towards paying for the related training and the associate's degree. And with the blueprint allocation, there is approximately $570 for students who are CCR, a degree, and we have relieved the state in the number of students who are pursuing a degree in itself is $6,000 a year. So we don't have enough money to cover all the opportunities and pay for this. So while some may, Rachel, look to CTE and say, oh, yes, and there's so many other costs where it just depends on what the employer is looking for. Are they looking for college courses? Are they looking for another training? Or will the CTE courses be accepted?
I assume consumables and as well, lab, I mean, you got
Yeah.
lab time and
Right.
leadership training.
Right.
And often, particularly in Perkins Grant, they don't cover consumables. So we have to look for opportunities where they will be covered. Where can we get grants who say, okay, we'll pay for some of these things that are consumable? It's tricky and it's possible.
I would just flag the apprenticeship investment, the paper apprentice program that I mentioned, like is a perfect opportunity to cover those exact costs up to $7,500 per. So hopefully.
And I had not heard about that, and so I think it's an opportunity. Again, I keep looking around the corner to my friend Anthony Featherstone because we have a partnership, and I think that's the conversation that we need to elevate with our employers, because they are always looking for, it's not that they don't have the heart. They don't necessarily have the financial wherewithal, because there are a lot of our companies that are just mom and pop, small companies. And to that end, there are some of our companies that we've saturated in these 66 because they had a pool. And now we fill the pool and they don't have room for more. So now we have more students than we have employers. So it's just so much that we need to do.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And this is helpful to see a bit about how the funds are being used in like very specific categories. And there's so much opportunity about stacking apprenticeships into associate degrees and vice versa. Like if you're in an associate's, you can be in an apprenticeship program at the same time. So like, I appreciate what you were saying earlier of like, some of these lines are incredibly arbitrary and they need to be blurred sooner rather than later.
With Cooter, I was wondering, and this goes to the earlier conversation that we were having around employer engagement. I'm a bit familiar, so I don't pretend to be an expert. I'm just wondering if you could say a little bit more, and I'll tell you what my thought process is. My question to you was gonna be like, is there a statewide version of this? Because if you're also an employer, you don't necessarily, and a major employer, so it's different between small businesses and major employers. I don't wanna necessarily have to partner individually with LEAs and counties. So is there, yeah, if you could just say more about that, just thinking about the incentivizing the employer engagement and how to make it easier for them.
I love this, what Aaron shared about the financial incentive. But to your point, Hooter, in fact, I know they do partner with states. And if they have not knocked on your door yet, they will soon be knocking, because that's the conversation that they are having about. How do we do this at a state level so we're not going around the LEAs to make this happen? And it is critical. I think the employers, once they see the ease in which that they can navigate this technology, and they don't have so many hands knocking on their doors, it incentivizes them to pay attention, to listen more carefully, and they recognize all the benefits of having students, to grow your own, someone mentioned grow your own part. So we continue to have conversations with employers. What do you need? How can we help you? We don't want to just keep asking, but how do we make it easier for you? And this was just critical. Tell me, one-stop shop. Where do I go? And can you all talk to each other? So that so many, when I say you all, it's, we are knocking on the doors. We've made this a central process so that our schools are knocking on the doors. It's easier to go there. The colleges are knocking on the doors. The private industry, everyone's knocking on doors. And so I think they gravitated to this because it's just a smooth, easy one-stop process. We've gotten a lot of traction around it.
On your, and just on your state level question really quick, my understanding is that roughly half of districts are using this platform. And something like that, maybe approaching half, and the other half or a little more than half, and for those out there, please, sorry for missing the numbers a little bit, but there's a number using this or moving toward it, some using other platforms. And so I think there is a really important discussion around whether implementing one platform statewide that seems to be working really well, that employers are saying they really like, we have that feedback, and can really look at that. I think that's because you're making all the right points, and then it gives us a chance to think about how do other institutions or entities also collaborate. And then I promise after this one last question, we can let you keep going and share a little bit more with us. But on the kind of marketing piece and employer engagement piece, and you mentioned you needed like personnel, you need a dedicated person for your district. And I'm thinking of the apprenticeship navigator expansion that we just heard about too. I'm curious if you have anything you can share with us around how they are or are thinking about working with the navigators, or the local boards, or just some of the other players in the space that you mentioned. You're all knocking on doors. Is there work you're doing that's happening at the local level to coordinate that, or do you see clear opportunities for the state to help coordinate that? Or
I do know that my work-based team works very closely with the navigator. They meet, if not at least twice a month. Talking about opportunities, and the navigator is very helpful in supporting and going to do the visits to the employers, because we still have to do those in-person visits to make sure this is a safe space for our students. So they are working very closely, and as of late, with our Workforce Development Board as well. So that partnership is key.
In fact, I would say I got a live text during the meeting. Our teams met about the paper apprentice investment this morning, in fact. So
good.
I think that's a good news. We'll work together on that too.
That is good. And we can go probably quickly through the others, just pointing out some additional grants. This past year, 88,000 from Perkins, again, dedicated to related instruction and stipends to support some of the work that staff are doing, teachers are doing. Next, again, the reserve grant. So this was just ideal. After the governor approved the teacher apprenticeship, we certainly leaned into that space, because we have 25 high schools in Maryland. And not in Maryland, in Montgomery County. And 20 of them have a CDA or TAM programs, so we have students in these schools who would like to be teachers. So we are expanding them. Well, let's go on more competitions. Educators Risers is a CTSO opportunity, so we take students out just to make sure that they are aware of what comes with the teaching profession and all the opportunities. Para-Pro, we provide them with this curriculum, goes back to your question, Rachel, about the prep and are we paying for some of the things that students are required to do. We pay for the preparation for students to take the IRC, and last year was our first year. Last year, we had about 33, and this year, I think we're in the 60s of students who are taking the Para-Pro. After they take the Para-Pro, they go across the hall and meet with our HR representative who gets them into the system in order for them to be a para-educator. So they can graduate, come work for us as a para-educator while they're going to school to help them pay for their tuition as we grow our own pipeline. So this was just great, so great that we did it again. FY 26, well, you're gonna see FY 25 before I go to FY 26. This is a grant from WorkSource Montgomery. They provided us $30,000. So whenever there's an opportunity out there, we're reaching for it. And we're, again, fortunate to have our partners at WorkSource Montgomery to help us in this work. And now in FY 25-26, again, this is not in Maryland, but I'm not sure if you're familiar with ESG's Education Strategies Group. They partnered with a Washington Partnership, and it's financed, Talent Ready is financed by JP Chase. And they provide funding to 6 regions. Montgomery County is one of them. And last year and this year, we have a grant totaling $500,000. 350 of it actually went directly to WorkSource Montgomery so that they can hire 2 staff members dedicated to helping us find employers. Now, they've just started the work, so we don't have an return on investment yet, but that's the kind of work we need. We need boots on the ground, talking to employers, and they are our employer experts. So these 2 individuals will be out there working the streets or knocking on doors or doing whatever they need to do, not only to bring in apprenticeships, but internships as well. We have thousands of students who are taking advantage of internships. But if we can change even the employer mindset from an internship to an apprenticeship, that's a win-win. So we're looking forward to see what that results in. And then we also had the work-based alliance, but that was internship, so that's fine, Catherine, you can stay here. This is a Perkins grant, and we put additional funding in Perkins grant, again, for the related instruction and part-time staff. And then finally, the last grant, I think I have one more, the last reserve grant. And this one supports those non-traditional careers we're talking about. A lot of people think about apprenticeships, oh, construction, automotive, okay, great. What about teacher? What about dental? What about biotechnology? All of these are opportunities for students, and we're leaning into it. And we have done some great things thus far. We are working closely with Montgomery College. Montgomery College, I will say this parenthetically, they did say it's challenging to be approved by the Department of Labor to be a group sponsor. So I think it may be worth examining these non-traditional groups, the educational groups. I guess mostly employers are the ones that need to be approved. But when if you might have more community colleges who want to be a part of this work, that process, and I can get some more information from them for you to assist in that process. But biotechnology, they were insistent that we want degree pass. And so it's great to have Montgomery College on board with that. And then the expansion of the CUDA platform, because this is, in that expansion, we are using apprenticeship pathways. So we're grouping students differently, and we just needed some additional technology in the platform. If it is something that's statewide, maybe that could help with the costs, because we'll be serving more. But with that, I think I'll leave you with some of the challenges and opportunities for us. Some of the challenge was changing the old mindset. Our way is the only way, and we saw how far that got us. But then really just considering looking at best practices around the nation to replicate. And then again, I've already spoken about looking at different opportunities, not just focusing on the trades, but looking at those that I've mentioned. Dental has been a really good one, as well as the biotechnology. We have so many biotechnology firms right here in Montgomery County. And then the challenge, we know that Department of Labor has a challenge securing employers who will hire our students who are under 18. So we need to just work more closely with our workforce board to support that work. And then, of course, the lack of dedicated funding, supported infrastructure. So the opportunity was just to seek our different funding sources, and we will continue to do that. Fortunately, the schools district just hired grant writers, so it's not as laborious on my team as it can be. And then again, to really just focus on the goal, knowing the target is there, but let's just focus on the goal of getting more opportunities and access for students. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Foley. Thank you so much for all of this information that you provided us, just this robust conversation about what's really happening on the ground. I'm so grateful that you, as well as Anthony and WorkSource Montgomery, answered my call and said, yes, I think this information will help us move forward as we progress with the CTE implementation vision plan and hearing what's working and what's not, how we can shift even in the policy capacity. This is very valuable, so hope we'll continue to talk and elevate some of these best practices statewide. I appreciate you. And with that, I'm gonna transition us back to Mara for upcoming next steps.
Okay, so thank you so much, Dr. Ford. That was really helpful and inspiring and inspiring. Very pleasure. Really appreciate all your time. I also, okay, I just want to make sure my math was right. So you had on there for 2030, 2031 that 1,400.
Yes, well, 1,400, I did have that because if we have the same number of graduates, we have about 12,000. So 45% would be about 5,500, but then 1 in 4 of those would probably be around.
Okay. I'm just flagging, that's like a third of the state's
Right.
number.
Oh.
Yeah. So, well, but here's one good news. I think the percentages of CCR, right?
Yes,
So
that's true.
your target will be lower.
Yes, it will.
That's the revised target.
Yes, is it, is the 1,400 there?
I mean, Montgomery County.
Well, 1,400,
Yeah.
so what I'm hearing you say, Mark, is that it's 45% of the graduates who are CCR.
CCR ready.
Correct, yeah. And we're CCR, in 10th grade, yeah.
Okay, I
So you have-
calculated 45% of the graduates.
Oh.
So that's all of the graduates, and I think if we look at our CCR number later.
I'm sure you're a huge chunk. I just don't know that you should be a third.
Yeah, yes,
I'm just trying to,
exactly. So that is lower, that is
How many
lower.
graduates again a year is it?
This year, I'm thinking, I want to say 12,000. That's a lot. We have more secondary students than some districts have students. And when you look at it by grade level, it's at least 10,000 or higher. But then if you start looking at the CCR measures, we've not gotten our data on the revised CCR measure. We expect it to be much higher. But even that, it's not going to be the 100% calculation I use for here.
Right.
So that's why.
Yeah. I mean, keep me honest. Am I
No, you're
saying the wrong thing?
You're 100% right. And actually, this is also why when we have our statewide targets set, working with each district to set local targets that roll up. So we can also help with some TA around this,
Yes.
right? Like, there's some complicated math going on. There's a lot of commas in the vision.
Yeah.
Whole sentence.
Yes.
And we want to also make sure, I mean, we're actually for 1,400 instead. I mean, that's great,
Oh,
but
yes.
Yeah.
I would just layer in and not to get too weedy too quickly, but since we're into the math, like, I mean, I think the 4,050 goal is actually about completers. So we actually need probably 2 to 4 times the amount of employers to raise their hand and say, yes, I want to participate in an apprenticeship, and to then actually provide for that apprenticeship opportunity. So like not just get approved, but actually do it. And then, even thinking about the small and medium-sized businesses, like after they bring on one apprentice, like they may, like if we did our job, that person is employed, right? And so they might not have the capacity to take on, 10 at a time. So I actually think it's an important conversation of like, even if the goal is 4,050 for the state of completers, We really need more like 12,000 or 20,000 employers to provide the opportunity for high schoolers.
And just, first, Dr. Floyd, thank you so much for the great presentation. But one more sip of advice, I know you're talking about working with, DOL, and for employers who are skeptical about hiring under 18, but there also could be an opportunity to be working with, the regulatory boards, because some of the boards prevent businesses from hiring people who are under 18. So, partnering with them, and there are some exceptions. There are great states like Illinois and Michigan and a few other states that are doing some good work around making exceptions for CTE students specifically to allow them to get licensing and actually sit in the regulatory space and work. So just an FYI, those are things you may also have to consider. Thank you so much.
Can I come back?
Yeah.
Invitation for you, Dr. Floyd. Thank you. This was great.
Okay, so here's what we've got coming up, over the next 2 months. We're gonna be fleshing out the full, joint CTE vision implementation plan. We'll get it to committee members, a couple of weeks ahead of the, June meeting so that everyone can have time to review and weigh in. Also, we're going into our IRC biannual review process, so that's a lot of what we'll be talking about. Those are really the two major topics for our June meeting. Then we'll, looking at July to September, we're gonna really focus on, okay, what is the strategy and structure for long-term ERT visits? How are we thinking about that? And to the extent that we need to have legislative changes like due dates, et cetera, moved, what we want to get all that ready, for the 2027 legislative session. And then, towards the end of the year, finish out phase 1 ERT visits, and start actual execution of the joint vision implementation plan. So what we're working towards is having all of the bodies sign off by July 1, I think, so that we can move into actual implementation and accountability around that. For me, it will be a super exciting time after looking. Okay, anything else we need to discuss today? Well, I just want to thank you all for a very robust discussion. I think this is one of the best meetings we've had in terms of folks really leaning in and talking about the hard things. And I think that's the only way you ever get anything pulled up. So I really that. There are no further, see the dates upcoming. Also, if anyone would like to host one of our upcoming meetings, please reach out. If there are no further agenda items, can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
Second. All in favor? Meeting is adjourned.
Yeah, I was trying to.